All right. This is Wednesday and it's July 5th, and it's just after 9:30 here on the West Coast in Pacific time. And it's me, Dean, and Jordan today. And I don't know about you, Jordan. We've just checked in for about a second before I turned on the recorder. And it seems like we're both doing pretty well. Had a more relaxed time, perhaps over this long weekend and so on. And that's great. Um, and I would just like to remember from last week, I asked you to send over something about some kind of evocative or yeah, evocative stuff that was stirring you up a little bit. And I asked that if you would send the link, I could watch whatever you were talking about. And I've been given some thought to the whole idea of another thing that I've got in parallel with our time here in the community of practice, about sense making. And I don't know how much you've been, really hands on in that exploration of the past 3-4 years, primarily through an organization called Rebel Wisdom on the interwebs. They brought together a number of pretty heavy duty, mostly white male pundits, thought leaders, people who have something to say about sense making in a number of aspects of human life now. And one of those guys was Daniel Schmachtenberger, and I think he was sort of the backbone of that whole conversation and did a great job. And I think they also did a great job themselves, the two guys that run Rebel Wisdom. Particularly, one of them is really a journalist by trade before the Rebel Wisdom time, and he did quite a long series toward the end of the pandemic about so many of the controversial aspects of the pandemic. And God knows there was a lot of controversy that has since, I think it's still boiling in the background, in not just pandemic talk, but from vaccines to do we have a trustable medical system, political system, and all the polarization that ripples out from there. And, it kind of just, to me, it just fades into a blob, a mess of polarization and not good sense making and not good communicating and certainly not good relating in many different pockets of it. So that's, I kind of obviously grew it out from your sharing of the link. And I would first like to start with that and just hear where you are with it, because it was, for me, quite controversial in a number of ways in my system and in my listening and in my own sense making. And it's a great place to start. And I don't have to go there today. I just wanted to come prepared with something that I would like to look at. And I'm curious if I could just check in with you. Is there anything that is kind of emerging for you that's more current that you might like to spend some time on or even start with that's different than what I was just talking about?
Oh, thank you. That was a great opening all the way around, Dean.
Right.
Um, there's always various things that are up for me because I'm
Mhm.
just cycle through them
Yeah.
as new information arises and uh, things happen. Um, I I would love to explore this particular facet
Hmm.
more deeply with you. I think we could do that today. Um, Especially how it pertains to sense making. I've listened to Daniel Schmachtenberger somewhat, probably a half a dozen videos of his, I'd say.
Yeah.
And I'm familiar with Wisdom, and but I'm not sure if what I listened to came through that channel or not.
Hmm.
I didn't really track their conversation about this. Uh, so yeah, I'll address it just what I see briefly, and then we could dig into it a little more.
Mhm.
I've watched and continue to watch so much about what happened with COVID and what's
Mhm.
still being learned and unveiled just within the last day or so. Um, Boy, I don't remember his name. There's several reporters who Elon Musk allowed into Twitter to look at the files to see what happened at Twitter in terms of government pressure on messaging during COVID.
Mhm.
And one of these guys um, got information from, I think, some military sources, several, if not more than that, identifying the first three COVID cases. I just listened to this yesterday, but it's been out for about a week.
Mhm.
And they called them all patient zero. Well, they were all the main Chinese researchers at the Wuhan lab.
Mhm.
And so they they looked to Fauci and Peter Danzig, I don't know if you know that name,
Mhm. Mhm.
for comments. So they didn't really grab onto the part that Wuhan was funded by Fauci and our government, the NIAID. They didn't really grab onto that, but they did grab onto those were the first cases. And
Okay.
anyway, wow.
Mhm.
It just shows we're learning more and more and more about what really happened. Um, the why, the sense making part of it, is the most challenging piece.
Right.
And I've, personally developed my own theory, and that is that collapse, human caused,
Mhm.
this is challenging stuff, but human caused climate and human system collapse is so imminent. It's
Mhm.
so imminent right now that and in the risk and impact is increasing exponentially, that there needs to be some mechanism using some kind of plausible deniability
Mhm.
that the public will cooperate with and embrace, to be controlled, shut down, kept at home, starved, bankrupt, killed. Like, in order to contain us. And that was my theory even before I learned about what the World Health Organization was doing.
Mhm.
Not even just them, but uh, governments were doing around shutting down farmers and food supplies, and the Green New Deal and Build Back Better. Like this, I had that feeling even before those obvious new control mechanisms that
Mhm.
don't make any sense to me. So I don't know. That's the sense that's the meaning and reason I place on it. But and just in general, there is a war, like they say, like Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about, a war on sense making.
Mhm.
Uh, I think that's his term. Because if we can't think, we can't make sense of what's happening in the world. We're
Mhm.
dumbed down, we're
Mhm.
fragmented, we're more controllable. So, oh man, it's terrifying, the scope of it.
Yeah.
So I'll pause there, check in and see
Yeah.
what you see.
Yeah. Um, well, again, I thanks for, sparking this last week, sending the link. I did check it out. And it really hit a lot of important pieces of the conversation, like the structure in which a conversation this bold and this disturbing can occur. This is no small deal, just that we're having this conversation right now. And what I'm committed to is having this quality of sense making be a cornerstone in this work of living resilience, the community of practice that you and I are sitting in right now, and so on. And I don't want it to be something that's like dogma, that every person that comes in has to agree with every single point of what you and I come up with or something. That's absolutely not the point. The point is something along the lines of what you just got through saying, that there is indeed a war on sense making that is part of a long-standing commitment by those in power, which the roots of it go way before, let's say, 1900. Colonialization, slavery, the yeah. Anyway, the roots the roots go deep and they go far back. But where I pick up the thread is in the early 1900s, where Bernays and his crew started to create a way of speaking with the masses, with entire countries, to be able to deliver communication that controlled, that influenced them without them even knowing it, without us even knowing it. And that was obviously in two different domains, at least. One, the sales and marketing to us, because that's the lifeblood of our system, is people get wealthier and wealthier by other people buying their stuff or giving them money one way or another. And the other side of that is government control. So the messages go out so that the people will, in one sense, not have a center. They will forfeit their center in order to be a part of this capitalist system in which everybody's got the dream of becoming wealthy and powerful and so on. That forfeiture of center basically implies what we've turned out to be now. It's taken decades, but they've got the systems in place and they work real well, and we have loved it. We're eating it up collectively. And I think we can all agree that these influences are far more powerful now, far more ubiquitous and far more powerful and potent now than they were 20 years ago. And in just the past few years, the curve has steepened to a straight up line of how much of our attention and agency and sovereignty, personal sovereignty, has been sucked out of the average person. And so we are in a ridiculously vulnerable time, at a time when I would argue that we need our center. We need that sense of home and groundedness in our being more than ever. And for that matter, we need to have solid, clear, committed relationships in our lives. And now we are in the midst of the greatest loneliness epidemic ever. And on top of that is the polarization that's going on, that is literally in every facet of our lives. So I'm saying this, I'm sorry if that sounded a little lectury. I'm saying it because I'm also recording this with your permission. We may just want to post this as a podcast episode so that people can get a sense of some of the stuff we talk about here. And we'll clear that at the end. If you don't, if for any reason you don't feel like doing that, we'll just not. But it feels like a really vitally important conversation. So thanks for kind of sitting through a bunch of stuff that I'm sure most of it you're real familiar with. The last thing I would like to say, to just get the thread back to what you shared last week and so on, and if we could go a little bit more in that direction, there's the the real leaning in that I my attention went to in that article you sent was the the insinuation that there's massive population reduction in mind with these powers that be, that targets were mentioned of by how much, and these percentages were massive, that the article was suggesting that this is the intention of those in power to reduce the populations of virtually every country by a staggering amount. So let me just stop there. Again, thank you for your patience and in the kind of context and background. And I'm curious if you would like to say anything more about that aspect of the article that you sent.
Sure, Dean, I would be happy to. Well, I guess one place I would like to go with that is some ways that I've learned from my study of what happened during COVID that could actually account for that. Um, and more information becomes available all the time. Um, so, well, I'll just kind of summarize it. So,
That'd be great.
one thing that's been learned is that, the from the injection, and especially the injection, and somewhat from COVID itself, I guess this mechanism would be true, but it's that the RNA, and therefore the spike protein, has traveled throughout the entire body, um, all organs, it crossed the blood-brain barrier. It has an affinity for certain places within the body, also because of the lipid nanoparticle that it was encapsulated in. So it's in the testes, the ovaries, um, the cardiovascular system, the brain. Um, there's certain places that it just has gravitated to. And when a cell expresses a spike protein, the immune system sees it as as an invader, so it will kill that cell. So so it becomes an autoimmune disease de facto. The body is creating something that it then kills within itself. So tissue dies basically. And some autopsies have been done now by a German doctor. I don't know his name, but they sample the tissue and they stain it, and they can actually see the spike uh, in the tissue, and it's causing clotting throughout the cardiovascular system. It's, it's a, there's a lot happening. So, like on certain fronts, so in terms of reproduction, reproductive health has been impacted dramatically. There's a decline in pregnancy and babies born and babies' health. Um, so that's one area. Another area is a massive increase in cancer. A good friend of mine, in 3 months after having COVID itself, has stage 4 lymphoma. I think that's cancer, but that's anecdotal. But cancer's growing. All all cause mortality is spiking and is continuing to rise. It's showing up in insurance records. Uh, people claiming disability and leaving the workforce is increasing. So that's an area that I'm familiar with. Cardiovascular disease, stroke, dementia, the list kind of goes on and on. And then another area that I'd like to mention, I don't know if you've ever heard of a vaccinologist from Europe. His name is Gert Vandenbausch. Have you heard that name? No. Okay.
I've heard the name, but I don't know anything about what that person talks about.
So I'll he's long-winded, but I'll try to put,
Mhm.
I shouldn't even be laughing here. What he's saying into a nutshell is that the pandemic itself is far from over.
Mhm.
And he's predicted that a number of things would happen. And so far, most, if not all of them, have come true. And that's basically, you don't ever want to vaccinate into a pandemic, like you're having a pandemic. And if you vaccinate, if you're not trying to vaccinate before it and create herd immunity because of a, what's it called, sterilizing vaccine, meaning it stops it. If you don't do that before a pandemic, but you do it during it, uh, you actually provoke the virus to mutate. That's where the variants are coming.
Mhm.
So a virus must, according to him and others, reach what's called herd immunity, meaning enough people in the population have immunity that can suppress it to protect the small percentage of the population that doesn't have immunity.
Mhm.
Okay. And then it kind of dies back to a low level, or I don't know, maybe it goes extinct, but I'm not sure. It could become an endemic. So we messed with that with the vaccine.
Mhm.
It still has to reach herd immunity, according to him. So it has two tools. That's it. One is more contagious, and one is more virulent, meaning it makes you sicker or could kill a person.
Mhm.
So um, it's reached its limit now uh, relative to contagion. So it's highly, highly, highly contagious now, and it's increasingly becoming contagious as we've gone through these Omicron variants. The only other thing it can do to reach herd immunity is become more virulent. It became less virulent, but he thinks that was for a period of time. It just stayed in the upper airway, Omicron. It didn't go to the lower airway,
Mhm.
which it did during Alpha and Delta. If it returns to the lower airway at this point in time, and because of the weakened immune system of so many people that were vaccinated, there's several ways that their immune system isn't functioning properly, but it's basically pointed in the wrong direction and or not responding
Mhm.
appropriately. So there could be, according to him, a very quick spike in virulent cases that would spread quickly. Now, I did the math. In order to have herd immunity, they have to estimate what percent of the population uh, would have a functioning immune system that could actually defeat the virus. So, you know, think about what percent is not vaccinated, basically. That's the population available to build herd immunity within. Then that small population has a carrying capacity of vaccinated people that would not ever have herd immunity, but it's a small number. So, I mean, I'll just make up numbers. So 50 million people haven't been vaccinated and they can fight the virus, and they can carry a 20% unvaccinated population. So that's another, say, 10 million, that's 60 million. That's what could be left after an event like this guy's talking about. And thing is, nobody knows what would happen, but really nobody's talking about it, like they didn't talk about anything of value, like using vitamin D or, you know,
Mhm.
or exercise or losing weight or, anyway. So those are the kinds of drivers I see from what happened, and then wonder about, well, how much of this was done knowingly, intentionally, and so forth. Because a lot was known. A lot. For 20 years, they knew that, I believe, that the lipid nanoparticles went to certain organs and that it's not a good idea to mix them with mRNA and harm our reproductive system, as an example. So anyway, it's painful and challenging to look at and
Mhm.
talk about, but I I can actually see plausible groundwork has been laid to create something like that article talked about.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So to just thank you for um the specificity, you obviously have researched this and are far more conversant about far more of the topic than I am. Um, and just in how you laid it out, and before that, the context that I also offered, it seems like we're talking about um, many, many layers of human interaction that are at least not helpful with sense making, or they're downright antagonistic to sense making. So there's a lot here. Um, and within that, I would like to just say that there's a lot of hyper dramatic and polarizing verbiage that can be used when folks in one camp or another of what you're talking about, what we are talking about, uh, starts to talk about some of the other camps in the conversation, it can get pretty ad hominem. It can get pretty destructive. It can be extraordinarily judgmental and polarizing. And across it all, a person really needs to learn how to learn, to just get a foundation for this conversation, just to carve out a place to stand, to start to really learn. And that's where my focus has been in these pandemic years and to now, is really looking at the places where we've been either crippled in our ability to learn about something that really matters to us. We've been, and how we've been crippled is by a constant fire hose of nonsense. Even though if there's some truth in it, it's just this barrage, this 24/7 fire hose assault on our ability to perceive accurately, to relate accurately, to to know where to go to find research, to how to call something valid or verifiable, and so on. It's extraordinary. And so I'd like to just shift gears to speak about one tiny element in this. It happened to show up in the article that you sent for me to read last week. And I mean this in no way as a judgment about you or even the people in the article. It's just my reaction. Like it was like, what the fuck? And some things that have become red flags for me showed up in that article, in addition to what caught my attention and had me be curious. It was not just a binary. It wasn't just one or the other. And one piece was to have really come to a conclusion that was so certain that there was just a repetition time after time in the article of, gosh, and I'm so sorry I don't have it up, so I'm going to probably forget the exact wording, but it was something like the weaponized injection, or the dang, I'm sorry, that it makes a big difference that I don't have those words exactly, but it was, let's just say it was weaponized injection. I notice as soon as somebody goes over a certain line of certainty that I just don't quite get where their intensity of certainty comes from. And then when I hear the multiple times repeating a judgment-laden assertion, and then it really, what I noticed in myself is I immediately started to question, so these are massive projections, massive ideations about what is intended by those in power. This is an intentional scheme to reduce the populations by, a third, a half. I mean, just these incredible numbers. And so I noticed that my knee-jerk reaction was to become very skeptical, like, these are mind-blowing numbers. And I don't understand, like, what's in it for the people in power to reduce the populations of the planet by a third to a half. It's so massive that, it blows circuits for me, and and it makes me wary, and I'm start to listen in a more judgmental way. So what I'm trying to do is not at all, again, put something in your lap about I disagree, or these people are fucked up, or I don't know. I'm trying to share as openly as I can what my inner reactions were. And I think I'm fairly adept at self-assessing where I am in a particular conversation, or as I'm reading through an article or watching a video or hearing a conversation. Every time I'm having those kind of reactions, especially if I'm not aware of them, I'm slashing a part of my sense making away. I'm starting to become reactive. I'm starting to rigidify my judgments and so on. And so I become part of the polarization. I become part of the rivalrous dynamic that is so, man, it was just breathtaking during the pandemic to see, people literally attacking nurses and doctors for them doing their job as if they were somehow the bad guy because they were taking care of people who were deathly ill, like it or not, or wherever it came from, or whatever. That's like my personal little uh, safe space in the pandemic time was like, I got to go to one place that I can believe in, and that is there are people on the front lines in this, from people who were called what's the word they were used, essential workers, or who were not were is thankless jobs, still paid almost nothing, or the full on health care professionals who were just trying to take care of people, and they didn't have anything to do with Fauci or anybody else. That's the kind of place I would retreat to when I found myself getting activated or getting triggered in some way. It was just back to, can we just be people together here? And at some level, is there a place where we can just be present with one another and start the conversation from that there are some people who are sick authentically, no shit, with or without vaccinations. And there are people who are trying to take care of them. And is there a way we could just hold space for that truth in the center of this whole thing and explore out from there as people who are in a nation together, in a situation together, and so on? So I'm wondering if that sparks you in any way.
Much of what you said sparked some things within me I'd like to share about. Um, so, one question you asked at the beginning is, how do we learn? In it, like, I'll just say how I learn,
Hmm.
especially at a time like this with issues that are so complicated. Um, it basically, I'll draw on some uh, shamanistic
Hmm.
ideas I learned early on. Uh, one is just one that is referred to as suspending disbelief. You
Hmm.
know, suspend what I don't believe and set that aside.
Hmm.
And then for me, where I go is I'll read things, watch things, witness, and take it in, and using all my facilities, look within myself to see what seems to be true or not true. And I'll I'll start to build a model, like a working model of
Hmm.
what I'm learning over time.
Hmm.
And I don't I look for both breadth of information and depth of information,
Hmm.
you know, across multiple perspectives, and try to approach that with some curiosity. And I mean, really, frankly, with COVID, uh, I was wanting to learn how to develop my own early treatment protocol from the very beginning.
Hmm.
And I mean, maybe December of whatever year was it, 18, 19,
It
these,
was 19, yeah.
yeah, these articles started coming out from China. Google would said, knows what I'm interested in, so it sends me things like that. And anyway, build a working model, suspending what I think, depth and breadth, and see just how reality for me starts to emerge.
Hmm.
And eventually becoming more careful about where I place my attention within that, right? Like what warrants attention and what doesn't warrant attention
Yeah.
eventually. And so, like that term you used, weaponized injection, or they used in the article, not you repeated it, um, actually had very little charge for me. It's gotten to the point for me that I thought, wow, that's really an accurate description based on
Hmm.
what I've accumulated over this. 2.5, close to 3 years now. I won't go into the details, but there's many, many, many. And so, but I do know that language gets used in a polarized way, polarizing way to separate us
Mhm.
and trigger us into one camp or another, one meme belief system or another.
Yeah.
And that I think is something that's played on quite intentionally in terms of destroying sense making. Is
Yeah.
that uh, you and I have talked about spiral dynamics a little bit and
Mhm.
some of the value structures in various stage levels of consciousness, how we view the world, that there's paradigms for how we see things, and there's healthy aspects of a given meme or belief systems, and there's a system and there's unhealthy, called pathological. And I think information is weaponized to trigger us in the unhealthy aspect of whatever belief system we're viewing someone else within. You know, Republicans are like this, so Democrats are fed specific information to trigger and polarize and
Right.
separate, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to see our way through all of that. I mean, I remember when COVID wasn't even politicized early on. And
Mhm.
then as information arose, the layers of politicization
Mhm.
got added in.
Mhm.
Um, so you're right. It's a daunting task to find our way through what's real, what's true
Right.
for us. We're not all going to wind up in the same place, but
Yeah.
heck,
Yeah.
well, how do you do it, Dean? How do you find your way through
Yeah.
these layers?
Thanks for asking. I actually started the kind of the construct of how to hold how the world seems to work. I started that. I know I've mentioned to you a few times about how really my whole engagement with this kind of conversation started in my early teen years, where I got the message through a number of different sources really strongly in my system that this human enterprise around the world is not sustainable. It is not going to work out. There is uh, no life affirming continuity built in here. So, if I'm looking for that, said the messages coming in one way or another to me was, if I'm looking for that, I'll have a hard time finding it. There will be plenty of evidence for what a razzmatazz world we have. And I believe me, I loved it. I went out of college and went on my career track, and knowing full well I had all this information and all this experience in my system that was saying that kind of thing. And I just chose to go kind of make my mark in it, do my version of the corporate thing and the career thing and the make some money thing and create a body of work thing and blah blah blah. And so underneath, as kind of like a baseline for me has been what grew out of that, which is there is a far greater, deeply profound truth underneath and behind all of this hoopla, all of this human operating system, all the politics, all the entertainment, all the fucking everything. and that it really doesn't matter. You know, much of the messages I'm trying to convey here are ones that came in through shamanic work or plant medicine work, or learning kind of an energetic lens through which to view and experience life and so on. And these were not, they were rarely verbal messages. They were more of an impression on my system that left me with a vivid message. So that's where those messages came from. And so to come to a more daily living, how did I process and make sense of shit in the pandemic time? I'm already, decades into the insanity of our system. And then you put the Trump presidency on top of that. And I thought that the Obama presidency was almost as insane making as the Trump presidency in a very different way. I think Obama was the best Republican president that the US has ever had. I think Yahoo, great job. Best GOP guy we ever got. What I'm trying to say in an indirect way is just the insanity. It is just layer upon layer of unsustainable, self-terminating insanity. And really, since the Trump time in particular, the boldness with which it's no longer hiding out, it's no longer there's very little smoke and mirrors to hide any of it. It's just all right up front and wow. And if I loop back to what I just finished up my last share with, can we find a way to find a very human, daily living appreciation of another human being and them doing the best they can in good faith, me doing the best that I can in good faith? And can we find a place like that to interact? But that's like rare as hen's teeth, so to speak. It's just really, really rare to find that. And along the way to get to how I make sense of the world now and how I process, I think I just dropped that thread.
Well, you were talking about a healthy way we can relate with one
another. Yeah.
Accepting.
I'm trying to remember how you asked the question, and if it was about, basically, were you asking how do I do my own version of sense making?
How do you do your own version, staying grounded?
Yeah. So I stay grounded by going back to the basics that I just shared the history of. That very hard-earned home and center in myself, and those impressions from those very important teachers or mentors or voices, they're far more real and far more solid and something to live in and through than anything in this human world, any fucking thing. So it is profound to be able to find, easily return to this center. That's a big deal. And the sense making part, Um, I actually would recommend it. It's probably pretty easy to find. It's David. God dang it. Uh, it's one of the Rebel Wisdom guys. I can hook you up with some links to a wonderful series that he did about pandemic discord and polarization and so on. And there's a lot in how he did that is kind of right on track with how in a daily living kind of way um, that I do much of my own sense making, and he took it to the next level because he had created a quite a public environment in this Rebel Wisdom stuff in which he could share that, interview the various warring factions, and again, he just did a really beautiful job. And to me, that relationship, the qualities of the relationship that he invited, the qualities of communication and clarity that he invited, and the amount of calming down the bullshit and the rhetoric that he did, really admirable. There's not much of that going on, and I'm certainly at nowhere near that kind of scale. And so what I do is seek out the most important elements that I can and make choices out of it, similar to some of the ways that you described when you were describing how you make sense and so on. Um, Truthfully, a whole lot of the pandemic time, especially toward the last 6 months to a year of the still, lockdowns and blah, 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 all the, stuff still really active. I just had to put my head down, and just stay out of the fire, because none of it made sense on either extreme end. I have zero trust in any of the corporations that we're talking about. The pharmaceutical people, I have absolutely no trust whatsoever. And I have a tiny bit more, but not, I'm talking about 2 or 3% more trust or respect for the governmental agencies, all of them that were involved in any way. I think we are a nation and a global culture that is in collapse. And this is what it looks like. And I think it's going to get worse. And the best I can do is just keep myself scanning and keep looking for some sort of credible sources for an important thread of information that I'm after in a particular time. And more importantly, find select experts that I have come to trust in a number of different topics, and then listen to what they share or contact them and find out who they could refer to this particular piece of information and blah, blah, blah. The thing I'd like to finish up with, just keep it in the context of why I'm recording this conversation and why I think sense making and this kind of conversation is important in this work. Is that we have forfeited our center. And this is one important way that until we become aware and own it and say it in the way that it shows up in our own systems, you might say it differently, but we can at least sit in circle together and have some shared overlap of experience of our culture is antagonistic to center and to agency and to authentic relating in human beings. And so, to the degree we can find a way to relate, even in the midst of hot and heavy, politicized, um, inflamed topics, if we can find a way to stay related and to stay centered in our own inner reality, that's worth this kind of conversation. That's worth this kind of exploration. And I'm not at all. I think I'm pretty realistic that all of this body of work that I've put together, uh, I will be thrilled if it helps a small handful of people find and expand that sense of center, that sense of groundedness and relatedness, and possibly even access that kind of background, largest of all inner resources, the implicit, because I think we're going to need it. We're going to need it at that scale, because everything up till now, I think, is just a lightweight introduction to how much difficulty we're going to see. So thanks. I found myself really getting long winded here. Thank you for your patience.
Would would you like me to comment, like, for me,
Sure, sure.
about how sure, okay. Um, I, well, one thing you said a little bit ago sparked this thought in me about why why it is I think I need to make sense of what's going on. Like, that's a heck of a big assumption, right? Like, if one has already accepted, which I do, we're in collapse, and this is what collapse looks like and
Mhm,
feels like,
mhm,
and we if we could learn to live centered in the implicit and not even connect with the outer polarized dualistic reality, why do I need to struggle so much to make sense of what's happening and building like a model? And I think, like, what's the motivation for that? And deep down somewhere is a motivation that I think still that I can control my experience within collapse, or I can make it better for some other people, or I can make a
mhm,
difference, or and that ultimately, I don't know. I don't even know if that's really even true, you know? Um, I don't know that. It might not be true, but I have a core belief that I do need to make sense for some reason.
mhm,
One reason that I just realized is that I have is I think God or the implicit wants us to accurately witness what's going on now. Like, there's some aspect of the divine that wants us to see and experience and witness and feel and process and understand what's happening.
mhm.
Like, don't just turn your back to it, as painful as it is. So that's a motivation.
Yeah.
But gosh, I just don't know.
Mhm,
Um, anyway, the like one mechanism I use to stay centered is to feel it, to process it, to be with it, to
mhm,
allow it to, like, cook through me and work its way through my being until I can take another hard look, and
mhm,
I do that over and over and over again. Uh, it drives a lot of people in my life. crazy because they see me, they experience a look on my face that I don't even know that I have, uh, while I'm metabolizing it. But
Mhm.
that's one way I stay
Yeah,
centered, and then I keep choosing to go back,
yeah.
and take
I,
another drink of reality.
yeah. If I may, I'd just love to pause you and uh, reflect back because it's remarkable to me how similar this last minute or so of what you've been sharing is with a number of other people that I have this kind of conversation a lot with people like where do we find meaning, where do we, how's your center, and how do you bring yourself back to it, and on we, it's fairly common conversation here. And there was something that you said, and I don't think you quite used this word, but it was something similar, that you're choosing not to look away. And I notice when I'm saying that right now, just saying it, I felt a ripple up my implicit senses and system right up the center of my body and into tears coming out, pushing out from behind my eyes when I said that. That's a very strong signal in my system that there's a resonance for me with what you said and so on. And I have also heard that phrase a lot. There's an impeccability, there's an integrity to one's core, to my core, to your core that I'm asserting. This is just me making shit up how to talk about it. And I'd love to hear your reflection is when I'm in touch with that core, with the truth at my core, and I motivate myself from that. And part of what I'm being motivated to is to not look away, to continue to bring my attention to something that has some kind of resonance. It has some kind of attraction for my core and for my attention itself to keep presencing myself in the face of something that quite probably these days is of immense scale, probably existential scale, or at the very least, it has a strong, I don't know the word for this, so perhaps you can help me out. It's not morality, but it's something closer to a life affirming message that I feel resonates in my system a lot. And I get that that's something similar is resonating in you. Like you mentioned, perhaps I could make a difference in this world in some small way. And that seems to come from whatever I'm trying to describe here, because it sure ain't morality, but and nor is it perfection, or and nor is it altruism. There's just a life affirming pulse that I'm motivated by. And again, I think I'm hearing it, you being motivated as well. And one way that that's expressed is, and by not just you and me, is it's often said as, I've chosen not to look away, even though this is daunting. This is a big stuff going on, and I'm choosing not to look away. Does that spark you at all?
Sure, yes. I think the word is integrity.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's right, like you said, it's not morality, it's not right or wrong, it's not um I, idealism. It's who we constitute ourselves to be, like who we say we are to ourselves. It's deep down principles that get,
Yes.
like you said, worked and honed over time,
Mm-hmm.
hard won. over the course of our life, and we're forged out of that, and that informs our being, and from there we make that choice not to look away but face it, whatever it is
Right.
we're feeling or seeing, and then turning back again.
Yeah. I appreciate that integrity rang for you. That, it seemed like there's a basic agreement at some level that the word integrity fits for parts of this dynamic. And
Uh-huh.
another word that I've heard over the years from a number of different sources, and I'm curious because I think we've had some similar kind of, shamanic work or plant medicine work or whatever it is that, or energetics work that tends to be more appropriate as we try to articulate what's in that center, what's in that core. If I've reclaimed enough center that I know where it is and I know how to expand it, and I've been working that for a while, I know when I'm in integrity with that core. So the word integrity can fit in that dynamic and so on. Another word that is often used is impeccability. And it's not just about how the forks and spoons are lined up on the table. I guess in some small way it might show up that way, but far more like, I would assert that it's like the expression of that integrity over time in multiple spaces. So it becomes a part of what, again, I don't have a good word for it here, but could be called character. It's a little shallow, little, not quite the word, but I don't know what other word to use, of what is the expression, what is the presencing of that core, of that integrity over time through multiple moments as best I can muster. And sometimes I fail, and sometimes I do. I presence it, and so on. I feel like almost every one of these words is kind of a shallow little plastic shell. And so I hope it's communicating. And again, I'm curious if any of that rings a bell, or if you'd like to share what your version of that might be.
Certainly, it sure does. And I'm going to pause just for a second, okay?
Yeah,
Okay, I'll be right back.
cool. So folks watching this recording, it's usually not this heady, but for me, this is actually resonating in a number of different dimensions of me than just my head. I hope that's how it's showing up for you as well. This idea of sense making tends to ripple out into other parts of us if we let it. And I'm definitely feeling that going on, that rippling out into other parts of me, and I believe for Jordan as well. And for Sumitra, I so look forward to your reactions and your sharing your version of any part of this in when it comes up for us to get back together next week. And if others are watching this at any time, um, hopefully it's making some kind of sense, because we're Jordan and I share a lot of the kind of lineages that we've come from, and so there's a way, kind of a shared language in it, and we can kind of skip over having to define terms and so on. I hope that's not too confusing or too odd. So I again, I'm just hoping that you, the watcher, the viewer of this video, are finding some value in it. Uh, one thing I haven't mentioned to Jordan specifically in this call yet is there's this sense making course, this series of relatively brief, but I believe quite evocative elements that we're going to be laying out in the Living Resilience community space, where we keep our little online courses. We have a brand new introductory course coming on. And hey there, Jordan. I'm speaking with
Hey,
the folks who might be watching this if we decide to post this. And I was just getting to the point where I was describing how we're in the month of July here in 2023. We're going to be posting a whole new revamped introductory course to this study of the collapse aware and collapse acceptant communities, and a way to orient oneself, whether somebody's brand new to this conversation or somebody's been around it for decades. So I'm really excited about that. And that will also have some sense making elements in it. But where you're really going to find, I think, a mother lode of this kind of, but far more experiential in its orientation. And hopefully there'll be relatively brief chunks of conversations like this, but about very current topics quite specifically. The one that comes to mind, that because it's literally as current as can be right now, is AI, and how I believe that there's an important overlap of the now out of control AI methodologies and technology, and the self-terminating human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. I'm very firmly in the camp of that the expansion, the beyond exponential expansion of the power of AI is going to do nothing but accelerate and intensify every measure of our collapse, human caused collapse of Earth and human systems. There are lots of folks in a camp called, oh, it'll make us like a utopia and will be ultimately efficient in every conceivable way. That's one of the sessions of this sense making course. Actually, it's going to be more than one. So we'll go into detail about that there. Jordan's back. And you were going to offer some reflection about the last thing. And if you still have that thread, great. And if not, we'll start a new one.
because I have the thread, Dean. Um, impeccability is a great description for that attention. Um, yeah, it brings up a fierceness, um, an unbendability. Um, I think it includes integrity for me. Um, how I use my words, how I use my attention, um, how I hold, how I don't know, how I hold my gaze on what creates meaning for me.
Mm-hmm.
When you and I have discussed shamanism before, I mentioned that I had worked with Miguel Ruiz many years ago, and we spoke about impeccability and practiced that. Um, one of the ways was, like, that relates to this conversation, is how and where we hold our attention, and that
Mm-hmm.
um, that's up to us. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we have control of where we place our attention. Normally in the world, what we believe hooks our attention and drags us from here to there. Um, that would destroy any capacity for sense making. But
Can I just
sure,
want to take that point and just jack it up to the next level, because you've hit a sore spot for me that for the past 10 years in particular, with the smartphone revolution and all that that implied, and so much else in our world, we are being predated uh, at the most core level, starting with our attention, but also our sense of agency, our sense of sovereignty in our own body, and so on, the things we've been talking about. And I think you were just talking about when you said we have control over our attention. You might be talking about you and me. You might be talking about you and me and a small handful of people that you've met in your life. That I don't have a whole lot of folks that I've met in life that truly have what I would call a an ownership, and that they really occupy how their attention is deployed in this world. There's a very small number. There's a series of interviews that I've done in the past year or so with one of my mentors in the energetic studies world named Dr. Peter Nelson. And I've actually been intentionally having those conversations to ask someone who is masterful. He's a masterful seer in the energetic realm. And to ask him, how do you see? And how do you return yourself to optimal center, it would be my word, to be able to be healthy as a seer, seeing all that you're seeing and interacting with the world? How do you stay? I actually made up some words, most of them he doesn't like. It's okay. Energetic hygiene. How do I keep a good hygiene with this notion of impeccability? We haven't talked about impeccability, and I think I'll bring that up in my next interview with him. So, the last thing I would want to say about that deployment of attention and how critical it is that with the addition of AI, one of the most important elements I'm going to be putting in that sense making series is sparked by very wise words from a remarkable thinker these days, Yuval Noah Harari, who is asserting that AI and how incredibly astute it is, how able to learn the entire body of human knowledge in minutes. It's just like mind blowing what that means in terms of how it learns the cues at a very, very intimate level of what it is as it's reading you and me on the screen. If it's reading all my motions and all the words I'm using and everything I'm emphasizing and what implies a more passionate connection with one thing rather than another, and on, that is the next thing to on top of predating our attention. Is AI is now capable of reading all those cues and knowing within seconds, knowing us better than our own intimate partners know us. For some, they're openly declaring this is the end of democracy, that there will not be a fair election. There hasn't been one in a long time, and you and I both know that, blah, blah, blah. But truly, the whole notion of human beings choosing for themselves and really having a center from which to choose important things like politicians and so on, that those days are done. So thanks for again letting me go on and on, but it feels like I just wanted to turn up the heat to what you were pointing at with how important it is we have control and autonomy with regard to our attention. And obviously I said I agree, and we don't, most of us. And then taking it to the next level. So again, thanks for your patience with that. And I hope I didn't take you off the completion of your thread with impeccability.
No, you did. Thank you for adding that, Dean. Uh, I would say if we if we practice, I know many people don't do this, but if we practice witnessing what happens as we move our attention from place to place and what the impact of that is, which is completely different belief systems will form around it, completely contradictory belief systems that almost can't be reconciled can form by choosing to place our attention, in the worldview of a religious person or the worldview of
Mhm.
a Republican or Democrat. If we really take that on
Mhm.
and watch belief systems change, which they absolutely will, then we start to see how malleable
Mhm.
our reality is.
Mhm.
Um, I think somehow that relates back to sense making,
Mhm.
because then you can start to see the games that are being played around it. Um, so, uh, yeah, impeccability to me relates to the the attention that we hold as we look at and gaze upon those things. Um, just like integrity in a way.
Mhm.
Anyway, that completes the thread.
Great. Thank you. If I could, I'd like to just see if this is a good little punctuation to add to that point. It seems like that integrity also is, and again, I don't have the right words for it. I, I am soliciting help to create the languaging that we can have these kind of conversations with. Um, there is a purity, there is an accuracy, there is a truthfulness of the deployment of our attention at the level that I think you're talking about, that we're both talking about. This impeccability, this integrity starts with seeing as purely, as accurately as we can, without charge, without voting, without judgment, without anything. That is a place that I visited with Peter Nelson Conversations a lot. Was as a seer, I've lost count of how many times he said this. You need, as a seer, you need to have that an impeccable, I'm throwing in this word right now, an impeccable ability to put aside those judgments or those thoughts or those preferences or whatever the heck is default in our brains just as human beings. We need to be really good at setting all that aside. And it's out of seeing that. What came to me when you were talking was, if I'm seeing this world accurately, an easy way to summarize what I'm seeing is, on the one hand, we're in a self-terminating system, and there will be suffering and there will be death beyond anything that I can imagine. I just really see that. And then right next to it, with as much purity and as much accuracy as this one, and I'm just slowing down now, is the beauty. So I just had that ripple, just saying that word. I just had this upwelling, that kind of signal that the implicit is showing itself. And truthfully, neither of them matter in the way that we usually talk about things mattering. And they are also piercingly, immensely true. And so I just wanted to add that the deployment of our attention needs to start with our ability to truly see, not to interpret and interpret and interpret and interpret. Truly see. Yeah.
That's beautiful, Dean.
Mm.
I I I experienced that also.
Mm.
Uh, we can get hooked by by our emotions,
Hmm.
uh, judgment, fear, um, pain, uh, that will block us from just truly seeing. But as we explore the world and try to build meaning, if we can just learn to witness what is, then I don't know, the truth will be revealed,
Hmm. Yeah.
and it's okay.
And it's okay. Yeah. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for being willing to have this session go in this way and to cover this part of our individual and collective neighborhoods, as we like to say around here. Um, this is everything I was hoping for and way more in an exploration of sense making and how that fits into this body of work. And I'm just wondering if there's anything. First, is it okay with you if we post this to the public?
Uh, sure, we can talk about it more later. It's a little, yes, it's okay if we post.
Okay.
I've never posted anything, so this is a
Okay.
first.
All right. Um, anyway, just thank you for um, being willing to share with us your neighborhood a bit, how you process, how you sense make. It can be quite an intimate conversation, especially when we get into how we deploy our attention and so on. So, and for holding space for me when I would be sharing in this conversation as well. That was important and meaningful for me that you would do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
So is there anything more that you would like to say to close up this envelope of time together? Anything to kind of put a cap on it?
One one thing I learned from a sponsor of mine, uh, I don't know why this is coming up right now, but he had mentioned, not he had said to me, knowledge is half of recovery. Um, you know, there's a lot of work we can do in our lives around, I don't know, things that get in the way of perceiving what
Mm-hmm.
is.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, One might call that recovery, but another thing he said to me was just simple knowledge, knowing how
Mm-hmm.
things work and what is so, and distinguishing things. And anyway, it's in terms of sense making, to me, that's been huge. I think about it all the time. So maybe that helps feed my curiosity and helps me persevere.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
Yeah.
thank you for this time. I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And perhaps if you don't mind, I'd like to nudge you and Sumitra both uh, to perhaps contribute some ideas, topics, threads that we could include in that sense-making series, and perhaps even for the introductory course. And I'll bring some ideas about that I'd like to run by you both next week.
Sounds great.
All right,
Love
brother. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.